Before we can begin developing our metaverse, we need to establish some basic concepts when it comes to space. And how do we establish three-dimensional shapes in space within a metaverse? We're going to cover that in this lesson. For starters, let's talk two dimensions. And I'm going to bring back a memory from you growing up. Perhaps you took geometry when you were growing up and you had to deal with one of these grids. These grids are actually called Cartesian grids. And what they enable you to do is to establish where a point is in space. So right now, if I'm actually looking, I have a y-axis and I have an x-axis. And instead of actually saying left or right or up or down, I can now measure within the Cartesian grid where a point is within this grid. So the first thing I need to do is establish that the center of the grid, that is where the y-axis and the x-axis meet, is the origin. That origin has a 0, 0 value. The x value is 0 and the y value is 0. So the coordinates are 0, 0. Now, once we've got that, we need to then determine how do we go left, how do we go right, how do we go up, how do we go down? Well, instead of saying left, right, up, down, what we do is we put a numeric value. And what we have here is that starting from the origin at 0, if we go to the right on the x-axis, you have positive numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And if you go left, below 0, you have -1, -2, -3, -4, -5, -6. Now, the same thing applies to the y-axis. When you go up from the origin, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 positive. And when you go down, you have negative. Now that we know that, we can simply take these and we can actually find coordinates. So let's say we have a point and we find this point specifically and we need to establish where it is within the grid. The way we can do that is we simply count where we are in the x-axis and where we are in the y-axis, and we've got the coordinates. The coordinates are 4, 5, x, y, 4, 5. So that's what we do in 2 dimensions. This is bidimensional. But in the metaverse, we're going to be dealing with 3 dimensions. Well, let's go to the next level and add in a 3rd dimension. So when we look at 3D space, we need to go exactly where we said. We have the axis that's y, we have the axis that's x, and we said that when we're going in that direction, we have x, y. But in order to be able to go to 3 dimensions, we need a 3rd axis. That axis will be z. So let's recall right now, if we actually have a point that's within 2 dimensions, x and y, what we do is establish the point within x, y. Then we measure where we are in x, where we are in y, and our coordinates are x, y. But when we add the 3rd dimension, we need to then put a point in a different space. And when we establish that point, we need to measure where the z-axis fits in. So in this case, I have a point B. I know where it is on the x, I know where it is on the y, and I know where it is on the z. As a result, I can actually establish that B is located at x, y, z. You see, we have 3 dimensions now. Now let's go. You don't really need to always have y pointing up and x pointing right or z pointing towards you. You don't need to do that because you're going to be rotating objects within the metaverse. So sometimes z may be pointing in this direction, y may be pointing in this direction, x may be pointing in this other direction. And if you establish a point, it doesn't matter. As long as you know where z is pointing, where y is, and where x is, you can establish coordinates. So x, y will give you a point here if you're in 2 dimensions, or if you're in 3 dimensions, you can actually add a point B. And as long as you actually have a axis where you actually have a z value, you can then say x, y, z. So you have a point B within 3 dimensions. Now, you can keep that going. The x could be pointing in this direction, the y could be pointing in this direction, and the z could be pointing in this direction. And it doesn't matter. You can always check exactly where you are in the coordinates. In 2 dimensions, you have A here. And if you go to 3 dimensions, you actually have the 3rd dimension, z, and can establish we have a second point, B, which is x, y, z. Now that you know that, you know where to put a point. But if you line up a series of points into the infinite, you can build a line. We can then go into a totally different direction. And as I mentioned, a 3-dimensional shape can be established as a solid figure or an object that has 3 dimensions. In this case, we're looking at height, we're looking at width, and we're looking at depth. And we can establish all of these by using the x, y, z axes that we spoke about. All of this will be clearly covered as we create our own metaverse in following lessons.